This is Keith Ward with Visual Studio Magazine, and joining me now is speaker Brian Randell. Brian, welcome.
Thank you, Keith. So we're entering a new era where this idea of DevOps, so in the simplest terms, when we think about DevOps, and the person who coined it escapes me, but the idea behind it is simple. We want to, first of all, blur the line that has traditionally existed, or the barriers between developers building a software solution and getting it ultimately into production. I mean, that's one of the big hassles that a lot of organizations find. And what we're seeing is we look at our maturity model development. 10, 20 years ago, teams didn't use source control. Now it's really a given, you're gonna have source control. The next step was, we're gonna use tracking tools to track bugs and what we're building. Right, we keep seeing these things where we're getting some of the base things down that they are givens you will do in software development. Well, the next big challenge out there is this notion of continuous deployment and basically blurring that line to where we're constantly getting this closed feedback loop between the customer who's using our app in production and the developers who build it. Well, we want the IT folks there too, because they have an important job to do to make sure things work, make sure the systems are humming. But we have this problem where it's often like, well, something bad happened in production. Well, how do we know about it? Well, the user's screaming at me. We really want to change that. And that's the big picture of what DevOps is let's get IT and development working together towards almost a blur to where the customer doesn't care and they don't even notice that it's taking place.
So how far are we down that road? I mean, is there a lot of understanding going on? Are these barriers being broken down slowly? Is it happening more quickly? How do you think the industry, or where is the industry at this point in time with regard to that?
I think in a majority of enterprise customers, it's just we're at the baby step stage. In all honesty, particularly in a lot of people I deal with, it's a new thing. Now, some of the more mature organizations, the ones that are already doing the more mature development process, they do unit testing, they do continuous integration with their dev team and test, to where test teams are no longer as much a formal entity as a part of the development team. We're seeing them do it. Where we've really seen DevOps come out, and one of the companies that gets a lot of credit in the DevOps space of really talking about this idea of continuous deployment was Flickr. And we started looking at internet companies like Flickr, Facebook, Microsoft with their properties. I mean, Steve in his keynote here at VS Live was talking about petabytes worth of data. When you get to internet scale, you can't duplicate your production environment in test. So you start thinking about, well, how do we do things? Well, you start thinking about deploying to production a different way. And you start thinking about, we're going to push out stuff, and guess what? Rollback doesn't exist. We just push a new version out. And so I think it's on the internet companies that have had to deal with increasing scale. They started doing it, and then they've brought some of their learnings to the community, and now the community at large is saying, well, this is we don't have to be internet scale. Right. We can still have good processes and better quality.
Is there much suspicion between sort of the two groups? I know there can be a frustration because the developer says, why does it take so long to get me a test server? And on the IT side, the IT admin says, why don't you stop uploading junk code to my server that's breaking stuff? I mean, does that kind of suspicion still exist, and is that a significant barrier still?
Oh, I think absolutely. I think in your traditional enterprise, absolutely, no question about it. I dealt with a customer about a year ago, went and did some training for them, and they were looking to improve their development processes. One of the things we talked about was using Team Foundation Server. Using Scrum, they were looking into improving their process. And we ran into a big wall when I go, well, wait a minute. You're saying, though, that your testers all report up to this person and developers all over here, and you're even in different buildings. How are you going to do Scrum? In other words, do true Scrum, none of this Scrum but or fake Scrum. How are you going to do that? Because in Scrum, everybody's a development team member. And so that's an example of where we have it in just the development side. And now you want to talk about IT and developers getting along, having beer, living together, cats and dogs. Oh, it's going to be crazy. And that is a problem. And it's getting people to get this mindset of it's us versus them. Mm-hmm. And ultimately it's us delivering a solution for them, our customer, and we've got to get along and do it better.
So what is the starting point in your experience? What has to happen first for this integration of the two sides of IT to happen?
Well, I think one of the baby steps, just like any type of new methodology or new way of doing things, is you're not going to hit nirvana in DevOps right away. So what do you start with the baby steps? First one, let's close down the loop or make a closed loop communications pattern. So how do we find out issues from developers and production and get that to be a closed loop? So one of the things that Microsoft is doing is with their System Center product, in that you can integrate it with TFS, so when a production alert happens in production, the IT folks can send it to TFS directly. They don't have to use email. They don't have to go through some ticketing system. They can just create a operation issue into TFS automatically. The developers then see that, and then they can respond all electronically. You get this history, you get this communication cycle. It doesn't mean you still won't fix it the traditional way, but first start the communication channel. Get that going clear. Get some trust built there that, hey, when we find something, we tell you about it, you respond, and we can document it. Both sides are covered, right? Because part of it is people are just worried about, well, I don't want to get blamed for something being wrong, right? So let's close that communication loop. Then let's start talking about, okay, on the development side, do we have repeatable builds? That's a big step for a lot of companies. They don't have repeatable builds yet, which is where they can constantly generate new versions of their application all the time. On the production side, it's like, well, let's talk about breaking down some of these barriers. Why do we have these policies in place? What have we done in the past that has caused you to worry about how we're doing things? So it's a communication thing. It's like, let's sit down, let's have a lunch together. And so start with those brown bag experiences, and it's really it's the human experience. It starts with communication and getting along before you even introduce big technology.
Now, I imagine it's been helped along by the fact that virtualization as well has become more mainstream since, I mean, that involves both. Test and dev is a perfect environment for virtualization, and admins understand virtualization as well. Is that something that can be one of those commonalities that they can use?
Absolutely. In fact, it's interesting when you look at it, whether it's with VMware, whether it's with Microsoft's Hyper-V technology or the other vendors out there like Citrix, that there's this weird thing that, you know, developers and testers see the benefits of virtualization and go, I want that. But they're also going, I've got to write code. I've got to do this stuff. I don't understand all this stuff about disk space and should I put it on the SAN and, you know, how should I configure the IO and just all those things. And so they really need their IT pros to get along and help them. And so it's really this, you know, finding that common discussion point, and virtualization is a good place to do that. Particularly with lots of places running their IT environments in virtualized environments, and even production in virtualized environments. There's a lot of common ground that they can use that as a starting point. And by saying, let's set the test lab and use that as our continuous deployment test environment, that'll get the production folks to see that, oh, well, maybe they know what they're doing, and we can get something that's repeatable and trustworthy and move that into production. So yes, that's a great place to start for building that foundation.
Great. Brian Randell, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.